It is the last week in July of 2023. Some country music singer I've never heard of made a song that's evidently pretty controversial. It's getting lambasted all over my social media feed. Shark Week kicks off this week. And up till now, I've been too busy to pay attention to any of it because I've been spending my time, as per usual, zoning out to YouTube. And lately it's been watching Fedor Emelianenko highlights and Eddie Van Halen live footage on YouTube. And so maybe I'll talk about that too, just because I fucking feel like it. So this is going to be like actually a podcast. It's not going to be, it's going to be me kind of all over the place for about an hour or so. But yeah, so we may as well start with the first thing I mentioned. This Justin Aldean. Is that how you pronounce his name? I've never heard it pronounced. I'm going by what I'm reading here. I've never heard of him, but that's not saying much because, I've never been a big fan of the country music, at least not in terms of, what you hear on the radio, right? I mean, I can get down with some Hank Williams, some Waylon Jennings or whatever. That's all well and good. And even some newer acts, like the alt country scene, like, Sturgill Simpson, Nico Case, yada, yada, yada. I can get into any of that stuff. The stuff that's not commercial, right? The stuff that's not indistinguishable from pop and hip hop. I feel like country music, pop music, hip hop music, all the mainstream stuff is just kind of merged into one indistinguishable, homogenized pile of shit. It's all the same to me. So I don't really keep tabs on who's who in that world. I barely keep tabs on who's who in the genres that I do like anymore. To me, acts like, Lamb of God and the Black Dahlia Murder, because I'm a metal guy, even those bands are still new to me because I discovered them, well into my 20s. I'm the old guy now, so everything that's come out like post 2004, I don't fucking pay attention to. Anyway, back to the point. I figured it would be interesting since I keep hearing about this guy, this Jason Aldean, whatever the fuck. Again, I don't know who he is. I've never heard this song, but I know the title. Try That in a Small Town. A coworker of mine had asked me if I had heard about this controversy, and he says, "Yeah, they're saying he's racist and this." Color me shocked. It's a country star, so it's not a stretch of the imagination to see how that might be the case. How a country singer with a hit song might be considered racist. Right, because that whole demographic, the country scene, Toby Keith, I remember, recently after 9/11 had some fucking controversy about putting boots up people's asses or some stupid shit. So, it's country, it's typically more on the conservative side. And anybody, just, if you're a white person in modern day America and you go outside, there's a myriad of things that you might do unbeknownst to you that could be considered racist. So the fact that, almost everything is racist now, combined with the fact that it's a fucking country singer, yeah. And then, judging by the title of the song, I can already make some assumptions. But, I figured it'd be fun for me to sit here and read through these lyrics, which I can only imagine are of the highest caliber, right? Because we all know, for the most part, country artists, it's usually allegorical. They're usually challenging, not very direct. It makes you use your imagination. So let's see if we can, parse through this and figure out what this guy's getting at here. Okay. So I'm gonna kind of read this out loud, offer up my thoughts. I may or may not, once I'm done reading through this, actually take a brief moment to listen to the track and offer up my opinions on it musically as well. So, Try That in a Small Town by Jason Aldean. Sucker punch somebody on a sidewalk, carjack an old lady at a red light, pull a gun on the owner of a liquor store. You think it's cool? Well, act like a fool if you like. Is like and light supposed to rhyme? I'm not sure. Cuss out a cop, spit in his face, stomp on the flag and light it up. Yeah, you think you're tough. Okay, none of that rhymes. I mean, which is fine. You don't have to, it doesn't have to. Well, try that in a small town. See how far you make it down the road. Around here, we take care of our own. You cross that line, it won't take long. And see, you know, I'm reading it in my own, you know, accent, and I imagine that maybe the way this guy pronounces it, long and own rhyme. Fuck, I don't know, road, own, and long may also rhyme. So, I mean, I guess if it's around here, we take care of our own. You cross that line, it won't take long. I guess that could kind of work. But anyway, for you to find out, I recommend you don't try that in a small town. Got a gun that my granddad gave me. They say one day they're gonna round up. Well, that shit might fly in the city. Good luck. Try that in a small town, see how far. Okay, I'm not going to keep going through the chorus. Full of good old boys raised up right. If you're looking for a fight, hey, there's 2 words that rhyme. Try that in a small town, try that in a small town. Try that in a small town, see how far you make it down the road. Around here, we take care of our own. Yeah, okay, here we go with the chorus again. Try that in a small town, ooh, ooh, try that in a small town. Okay, so it's terrible. Unsurprisingly, you know, I'm a little disappointed that it's so direct, you know, it doesn't leave much to the imagination, which is very uncharacteristic of country artists as far as I'm aware. But what this sounds like to me is just this guy's disdain for what he's been seeing lately with, you know, all these riots and stuff that seem to happen every other week. Actually, it seems to have kind of cooled off. But, you know, amidst the whole George Floyd hullabaloo, COVID pandemic craziness and all that, you know, we saw a lot of this stuff. And I guess this guy's just kind of fantasizing about wishing that some of these motherfuckers would try that shit in his town, because whatever. You know what? This is not even worth talking about. I mean, I don't see anything terribly controversial about it, to be honest. Again, you know, just going outside, like I said, and having any kind of opinion on anything, even if it's on a particular, you know, fast food chain, could be, you know, construed as racist. So, yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear to me why some people might consider this like some fucking hillbilly talking about, you know, going back to the good old days and rounding them up in the fucking pickup truck and the fucking gun that granddad gave him. But I think that's a lot of projection, really, to be honest. I don't know that race has as much to do with it as just culture, and, you know, you could say that the two are inextricably linked. And this isn't, honestly, I wanted to take a look at it to see if there was any real, more overt, you know, blatantly racist shit in here. And honestly, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing anything that's terribly shocking. Again, I thought this is pretty much how most country songs went. So I don't know what really makes this one stand out in particular. But hey, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe it's the way he's saying it. Or maybe there's a music video that goes along with this where they're, you know, waving a bunch of rebel flags and, you know, wearing white hoods. So I'm going to pause briefly for a moment and take a quick listen, and I'll be right back with you in just a moment with my thoughts on that. Okay, so that was pretty much exactly what I expected. It wasn't anything particularly shocking, nothing, you know, too controversial in my opinion. It's, like I said, it's exactly what I thought it would be. It's a bunch of footage from the riots over the past few years featuring Antifa. And this guy just doesn't like Antifa, it seems, which, fuck, I don't care. I don't like Antifa either. And the only thing I found surprising at all was how rock-oriented some of the guitar riffs were. But I mean, maybe that's a thing in modern country too. Like I said, it's these modern genres, whether, again, it's rock, country, pop, hip hop, it's all just the same shit anymore. It's all just pop music. So, nothing really noteworthy at all about any of that to me. It's just like, what would you expect from any modern country artist? I mean, I wouldn't expect any different. But honestly, I already feel like I've wasted like the last 10 minutes or the first 10 minutes of this podcast on this, because this is very disappointing. I thought, given how much attention this song is getting, given how much attention this guy, I thought, there'd be like nooses or something to really remark on, or maybe he's dropping a hard R in there somewhere, but there's none of that. So I'm done with this. I'm not talking about it anymore. This meme needs to die, and we need to move on to Shark Week, because that's the other thing that I've been seeing a lot lately. Not so much on social media. People on social media, they're not talking about what's on cable TV. But as it happens, my kids watch Nick Jr. and fucking whatever other bullshit's on TV, and so I see commercials on TV. And I see the Shark Week commercials with Jason Momoa waving his arms in the air frantically like some kind of cracked out composer with great white sharks jumping all over the place. And it reminded me, like, oh yeah, Shark Week. I used to like Shark Week. I used to look forward to it every year when I was a teenager. Back in like 1998, 1999, I used to really look forward to that. And now not so much. And I wanted to talk about it because it bothers me. On one hand, I consider myself fortunate to live in a time where YouTube exists, because there's plenty. If you want to get your fix on wild animal content, whether it be about sharks or bears or whatever the fuck, there's no shortage of that in supply on YouTube. And some of it's, there's some real great content creators out there that dedicate themselves to this sort of thing, right? But, when I was a fan of the Shark Week, back in like 1998, 1999, I remember a special that talked about where Jaws came from, like the inspiration from Jaws, the man-eater of 1916 in New Jersey or whatever. And it was a really well done production. They documented all the attacks on people, in the river back then, and, went through the whole thing talking about the theories of it being a bull shark and whatnot. And it was all very interesting. And there was a lot of programming like that. And when it wasn't something like that, it was, watching sharks in their natural habitat do natural things, right? These wildlife photographers, videographers, or whatever, documentarians following these creatures around. If you've ever seen Planet Earth on BBC, that's my shit, right? Those old school fucking nature documentaries. But nowadays, it's just these fucks going into cages, throwing down like chumsicles, and freaking the fuck out when a great white shark swims near. It's more about the people, right? It's more about the humans than it is the sharks, right? It's Air Jaws, right? The first time I saw Air Jaws, when it first aired, again, like 20 some odd years ago or whatever, and you had these dipshits in motorboats towing a fucking fake seal behind them and watching as the great white sharks burst out of the water and into the air and then back down. The first time I saw that, it's like, wow, that's fucking incredible. But we've been seeing it every year for the past 20 years. It kind of gets old, right? And it's more about the people, the scientists, if they quote unquote scientists, experts in the boat, having fucking orgasms over what they just saw, right? Than it is about the shark itself. And I'm not interested in people that way, I mean, I'm interested in people. I'm interested in certain individuals. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a big fan of Eddie Van Halen. I'm a big fan of Fedor Emelianenko, but I don't really give a shit what Eddie Van Halen or Fedor Emelianenko thinks about great white sharks any more than I do the assholes on the boats on the Discovery Channel screaming and hollering, telling me the obvious. Like, oh, that was a big boy, you know, whatever. I don't less of that, more on the science, the facts. Show me a shark actually killing some shit. I'm not as interested in a great white chewing on a chumsicle or biting into a rubber seal as I am watching a great white hunt down actual seals. Watching them do what they're supposed to do in nature. Right? I feel like ever since, what was the first one? Was it Steve Irwin? It might have been. Steve Irwin, Jeff Corwin. Once these motherfuckers, and I know I'll probably catch shit for talking shit about Steve Irwin. God bless him. I'm sure he was a great person, but you know, I didn't like it when the humans started grabbing at the animals and getting like fucking up close and making it about them. You know, I'd rather watch nature take its course and listen to David Attenborough narrate it, right? That's what I like. And that's what it should be. Leave nature alone. Don't go fucking grabbing at them and manipulating them and fucking with them. And I feel like that's all Shark Week is anymore. I'm not learning anything. I just saw fucking, I don't know if it was from last year or this year. I watched it earlier. It was The Meg versus Jaws, right? They're trying to capitalize on the popularity of those two fucking movies. And I was like, dude, what are we talking about? We're talking about a megalodon versus a great white shark? And who would win? Well, that's the dumbest shit ever. That's like fucking grizzly bear versus raccoon. Why would you even ask that question? And they sit and spend an hour, quote unquote, testing their theories, right? Analyzing it, giving each creature points for speed, agility, size, strength. You fucking kidding me? One maxes out at about 20 feet. The other one maxes out at about 60 feet. Which one do you think is stronger? Which one do you think is more dominant? Just based on that alone, it's like fucking taking an hour to try to discern which is the bigger number, 358 or 2.5. And we're going to talk about it for a fucking hour. It's pointless. And I just feel like, on top, you know, cable TV, again, it's dying. And I know that might be segueing into a different topic, but again, you can go to YouTube and watch all kinds of fascinating videos about, you know, shark attacks, shark documentaries, interesting stories about, you know, people and their experience in nature with a shark, you know. And I know I said I don't want to make it about the people, but, you know, when it's a story about, say, somebody who went swimming in a river and then got confronted and it's like a fucking horror story, I'm into that shit. That's all well and good. It's entertaining. But the point I'm trying to make is there's more valuable content on YouTube or on the internet that is worth your time more than anything that you see on the Discovery Channel now. And it's got a big budget behind it. How many people are still watching this shit? You know, I gotta believe that, you know, when the boomers are gone, you know, 20, 30 years from now, I mean, I don't know, cable TV, it's just done. I mean, it's already, for all intents and purposes, it's, you know, the writing's on the wall. It's pretty much over, but it's not dead 100% quite just yet. But, yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me to get excited for Shark Week. It used to be kind of just, you know, I don't want to say like Christmas, but it was something I looked forward to every year. And that ended a long, long time ago. It's just the stuff that they put out anymore is, I don't know. I feel like it's more, it's like you sit and watch how much time, when you're watching something on basic cable, how much time is dedicated to commercial breaks, right? If it's an hour program and you do the math, it's usually about 40 to 44 minutes of runtime of the actual program. And it's 15 or plus minutes of advertising. And then within the program itself, it's usually focusing on whatever computer software they're using, or fucking whoever the manufacturer of the dive cage is, or something like that, right? So even the program itself is more of an advertisement than it is something of actual entertainment value. So I don't know. It's just, and I get, when you've been doing this shit for 20 some odd years or whatever it is, there's only so much you can talk about. There's only so many times you can put out an episode on, like, the 3 deadliest sharks, right? Because at this point, we're all well aware that it's the great white, the tiger, and the bull. Or maybe you weren't. Maybe we're not aware of it, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, but don't get me wrong. I still want to hear about it. I like different takes on it. And again, I'm going back to YouTube. Just watched one recently where a guy talks about statistics. Which is the most dangerous shark? Well, when you do the math and you look at the statistics, far and away, it's the great white, right? Because they have, more than twice as many attacks on humans than number 2, which is the tiger shark, right? And they have the most fatalities. But when you do the math, when you account for those numbers, right? And I think so. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it's something like 300 plus, right? So let's just say 350 attacks per year by great whites on humans. And, 16% of those attacks are fatal. And meanwhile, the tiger shark, it might be 140 attacks on humans per year. And it's a smaller death count, but when you do the math, it's the percentage of fatalities is something like 27%. So which is the more dangerous of the two? Right? And when you consider the fact that great whites, they're, more prone to attack surfers because surfers resemble seals. Great whites that's their number one target. Humans come into contact with them more often. So, whatever. I mean, these things are interesting. It's stuff that I'm into learning about and talking about. And, I'm sure they cover it here, on Shark Week, but it's just like, am I really going to sit and wait through fucking a half-hour commercials or whatever it is, and these dipshits on boats doing these stupid analytics just to get to like a few minutes of interesting material? Nah, I ain't going to do it, So, yeah, Shark Week, I don't know, it's a shell of its former self, in my opinion. And honestly, I feel like, where at least, even if it was something that's kind of boring or uninteresting or whatever, it used to be the case that, like, when you watched something like the Discovery Channel or Animal Planet or the Learning Channel or National Geographic, or take your pick, right? The Science Channel. Like, you kind of felt like you were doing something good for yourself. It was like healthy TV watching, right? You were learning something. It certainly wasn't going to make you dumber to the same level that, like, watching CNN or fucking Nickelodeon would make you dumber. But honestly, going back to this program that I kind of referenced earlier, talking about the Meg versus fucking Jaws, they went as far as to do a computer simulation of what would happen if, in the days of the megalodon, when it was still alive, and what a battle between the megalodon and 2 great white sharks may have looked like. And it was the dumbest, most ridiculous shit that I have ever seen. Like, and there's no real excuse for it too. The CGI was dog shit, and there's really no excuse for dog shit CGI these days, because right now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, I mean, even AI, you can go into like Runway AI and create something that looks better than what the Discovery Channel was fucking putting out with their stupid fucking TV program. It shows this giant. First of all, the megalodon and the great whites were like identical. It was just, the megalodon looked like exactly like a scaled up great white. And scientists believe nowadays, of course, that it really, didn't necessarily resemble a great white. Okay. It wasn't just a massive great white. It had a different structure. It was built differently. But in any case, the battle shows them fighting over a whale carcass. And it's like a grizzly bear versus a pack of wolves. Right? If you've ever seen that happen in the wild, like where the grizzly bear gets pissed off at the wolves, smacks a couple of them around, tries to fucking run them off. But in this case, it's like the great white sharks lead it on a chase, and it's chasing them, and they trick it to going down deeper than it wants to, and one kind of distracts it as it chases it, and the other one blindsides it and bites it in the gills, then swims away like it was like a deliberate hit and run attack, like something that like wolves or wild dogs would do, because wolves and wild dogs are fucking intelligent mammals. Sharks don't behave that way. They don't coordinate organized attacks like fucking lions do, right? But that's how they showed it happening on the Discovery Channel. So if you're learning about like how sharks behave based on watching Shark Week, you're actually getting dumber. That's how far this series has sunk. But anyway, I don't know. I guess I could sit and talk about sharks all day. They're a fascinating creature. They absolutely deserve their own week dedicated to them. But I don't know. I feel like, again, cable TV, it's so far gone. It's gone so far down the tubes that it ain't the place for it. If you want good content like that, I don't know. I know I sound like a broken record, but plenty of YouTube channels. If you're looking for recommendations, let me know in the comments and I'll give them to you. But anyway, speaking of YouTube, that's the other thing I find myself doing lately is just sitting around. I guess that's what old people do now. Where I guess like, my parents and your parents perhaps, when they were bored on a fucking Sunday afternoon, they'd sit down and they'd put on, old records of, the music they grew up listening to, and they would, sit there and wallow in nostalgia, have a couple beers or whatever. And I find myself more or less doing the same thing, but I sit on YouTube and watch like old Pride FC, highlight reels of Pedro Hizzo or fucking Fedor Emelianenko, like I mentioned earlier, and goddamn, those were the days. MMA is another thing I've kind of fallen away from once the UFC started to really blow past the mainstream, right? And every month there's like 2 or 3 pay-per-views and 2 or 3, live on Fox events or whatever the hell it is. It got to be too much, right? I couldn't keep up anymore. And then it started to, with guys like, Chael Sonnen and Conor McGregor and Colby Covington, all the theatrics, the shit talk, the fucking drama. It was so forced and so reminiscent of WWE, but not as good as WWE. It's like, if I want that shit, I guess that's the kind of paradox for me, right? I can't watch either. It's like the WWE, started trying to incorporate aspects of MMA once MMA broke through into the mainstream and started to become popular. You saw like the Undertaker putting people in triangle chokes and shit. And it's like, man, if I wanted to watch that, I will watch UFC. That's not why I watch pro wrestling. And if I want the shit talk and the theatrics and the drama, I will watch pro wrestling. That's not why I watch MMA. Right? So for me, I could sit down and watch either two sports, or sports, entertainment, whatever. But the heyday is long since passed for me. And maybe it's something similar to just like, how I talked about with music earlier. I think I feel like with most people, once you get into your 30s and 40s and beyond, you're not as receptive to new shit. And I find that to be true. always considered myself pretty open-minded. You know, I have a very eclectic taste in music. You know, I've been in some extreme bands over the years, you know, from just, any variety of metal, from nu metal to thrash metal to death metal to improv grindcore. I've been a part of bands in every fucking heavy genre you could imagine. So my taste varies quite widely. I mean, I'm also into classical music, bluegrass music, whatever. I have a very open mind. However, it's hard for me to keep up on what's happening today. And as I get older now, especially with having kids and that, I just, I can't get out to shows as much. I'm not part of that scene anymore. I don't, and so I find that my tastes in music, like I mentioned earlier, most stuff that's come out past, the mid 2000s or whatever, it's beyond me. I'm sure it's all great. I know there's a lot of talented artists out there. And I mean, to be fair, there are plenty of like YouTube guitarists, because I'm a guitar player first and foremost. And, there's plenty of guys like Charlie Paraderego or whatever the fuck his name is, Jared Dines, go down the list, Bernth, Ben Eller. There's plenty of guys who I'll sit there and watch on YouTube that just blow me away, and I fucking love watching their content and that, but it's not quite the same as, rocking out to a full CD or something like that, right? But I find that to be the case with MMA too, right? Most stuff, post, the collapse of Pride, right? Or I would say, no, I stuck with it for a little while past that. UFC bought out Pride, they brought all those guys over, Crow Cop, Rampage, and that. But once that generation of fighters started to all retire, that's pretty much when I dropped off. And it's not because of a lack of talent. It's far from it. Quite the contrary, actually. The guys that are out there doing it today are as talented, they're as talented at the sport as anyone's ever been, right? We have witnessed the evolution of that sport, and the guys that are out there doing it today are more complete fighters than anybody from the eras that I was a big fan of, right? Because they have a wider pool of knowledge from which to draw. So it's not for a lack of talent. It's just for, it's a lack of interest on my part. And a lot of that has to do with the way that the business is promoted, the way it's handled. I don't know that the fight between Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk is ever going to happen. I think that's just a big joke. But the fact that it's even talked about, and the fact that Dana White has even entertained it, just kind of, that right there shows you that this is a completely different business from what it was 15, 20 years ago, where these sideshows. But I will be honest, if those two motherfuckers fought, as well as I do, that shit is selling out. That's going to hit record pay-per-view numbers. Because that's another thing. We like to watch people who aren't professional athletes partake in these combat sports, right? These freak shows, Jake Paul fighting some over-the-hill MMA fighter in a boxing ring. People love that shit, and I'll be honest, I'm one of them. I like the freak shows. Those are the only ones that I get up for, to be honest. Not so much to watch guys like Fedor come out of retirement and fucking get their brains beat in or something. I hate seeing people ruin their legacy like that. But I think what I loved about the Pride days, because they definitely incorporated the sideshows, the freak shows, but it wasn't just that. Those were just part of the card. Because you had some real legit competitive matches, and the production was just on another level from even anything that the UFC does today. Over in Japan, they just treated it different. And it was dramatic in a way, not because of the shit talk, not because of the press conference antics, not because somebody's throwing a fucking dolly through bus windows, but just the lighting in the arena, the music, the presentation. It was just on another level. from anything that the UFC has ever done. I don't give a fuck. And I was never one of these, like, Pride fanboys back in the day when that was the big argument, Pride versus UFC, which is better. I was a fan of both, but Pride definitely had things to offer that the UFC didn't. And in the presentation, the production, that was one of them. And I hate to admit it, but allowing your fighters to take steroids definitely lent itself to some crazy fucking action, right? Some of those fights, I mean, you saw like superhuman level abilities, right? These guys as big as, Fedor and Krokop. Not that Fedor and Krokop are giants by any means. You have a couple guys that are maybe, between 220 pounds and 240 pounds tops. So they're not as big as guys like, Uberim or Brock Lesnar or Shane Carwin or any of these, giants or whatever, Tim Sylvia. But still big dudes, and they moved so fucking fast. And I think for anybody who was a fan of MMA back in those days when UFC first bought Pride, especially if you were a fan of Pride and you were familiar with these guys like, Nogueira, Krokop, Henderson, Fedor, when you watched these guys transition from the ring over to the octagon, it was apparent that something was different. And it wasn't just the lighting. It wasn't just the production. These guys were slower. They were a little doughier, right? Because, over here in the States, not that none of these guys take roids, plenty of them do. You get, but not especially in the USADA era, guys get popped for it. They still know how to do it. They know how to, treat their cycles and that. So it's not that people in the UFC haven't always been on roids. It's just they had to be careful about it. They couldn't just fucking dope up, like fucking Bane from Batman, right? But whereas in Japan, that was not only allowed, it was encouraged. So you definitely noticed like a loss in some of these guys' steps once they came over stateside, which, was interesting, but it was also kind of a bummer. It tore down some of the mystique that these guys were truly like almost superhuman, because like you watch a guy like Fedor, and I mean, he didn't look like much, right? He was a little bit doughy. He wasn't a small, weak-looking guy, but he was kind of just your average-looking, sort of husky dude. But man, that dude could fucking throw, and he could fucking move. And of course, not taking anything away from their talent. I'm not saying that roids was the whole reason these guys were entertaining, because roids or not, these were, the best fighters on the planet. I still would say that Fedor, along with John Jones, Anderson Silva, Royce Gracie, Matt, he's, go down the list, is one of the greatest ever, right? And you'll never be able to take that away from him. I just wish that he would have retired sooner, Seeing him get knocked the fuck out by guys like Matt Mitrione, who 10 years prior would have never been able to shine his fucking shoes, right? It's heartbreaking. You never want to see people go out like that. The Joe Louis thing, where he's getting his ass kicked by guys who were like just fucking journeymen, And I'm not saying every guy should retire like Khabib did, right? Where it's like, man, you're in the middle of your prime, you still got a long career ahead of you, and you're quitting now while you're on top of the mountain. I get that. Hey, he's never going to tarnish his legacy. To me, Khabib, it's a little bit early, but I'd rather see that than see a guy like Chuck Liddell that sticks around far fucking too long. And just, now you have those memories of Chuck Liddell getting knocked the fuck out by Rich Franklin, who, was, in his own right was a good fighter, but he was a 185er, and he wasn't even the best 185er. And had they fought back in, 2005 or whatever, it would have never went down like that. You watch him get brained by fucking Tito Ortiz, a guy who he kicked the shit out of twice. You see, anytime somebody taps him on the chin, now he's collapsing like a bag of shit onto the canvas. It's just, it's heartbreaking. You don't want to see that shit. I don't know. But, speaking of MMA, speaking of these greats, people debate. You know what? I'm going to save this for a different video. I'm going to save this for a different podcast. Because I was going to go off on a tangent about, who truly is the greatest fighter of all time. But, this whole thing's been kind of a mess. And I think I'll save that conversation. I think I'll save that conversation for who the best MMA fighter of all time is for another one. Because I think it deserves it. I think it deserves its own hour, or at least 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever I can muster, right? But, I guess, so I guess on that note, I'll leave it there. I'm going to call it a night here. You have any thoughts on Jason Aldean, Shark Week, MMA, Eddie Van Halen, whatever the case? Leave those comments below. I appreciate you sticking with me this long, and I'll see you next time.